Welcome to Ren Faire History, presented by the Digital Ren Faire. I'm Jonathan Crocker. I perform with the Wild Men at the Arizona Renaissance Festival as Dr. Cranius Lunch, and as Jake the Wild Men with Theater in the Ground at the Ohio Renaissance Festival. And I have been performing at Renaissance festivals since 1982. And today, I am joined by the lovely and talented Misti Bernard.
Hi, friends. I'm Misti Bernard. I have been on the road since 1990, full-time, and performing since 1993. You would know me from the Bay Area Renaissance Festival, from the Florida Renaissance Festival, Bristol. I've performed at Sterling. I've performed at Colorado. I am also a jewelry designer, and I own a company called Seasong Design. So I am both crafter and performer on the road.
Like, what was it like being a nomad in the ancient times? You know, like
in the before times.
Before the
Dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Back when walking out the door meant you were losing contact with everything at home.
Right? You didn't have a home phone. You didn't have it. So you where?
It was like the Wild West.
It was like the Wild West, you know, and it was one of those things that was most of concerning to my family because, of course, I got on the road when I was 19 and was just outgone, you know. So connection and communication was definitely of issue. I also had very unique circumstances in my sort of decision to come on the road, in that in 1990 at the Southern California Renaissance Pleasure Fair, I started working with a company that is still very, well-known and highly regarded on the road, Fellowship Foundry. And I did one show. I did the Southern Cal Spring Festival. By the end of that show, I was offered a full-time gig with this company year-round doing Renaissance festivals. And so at the age of 19, I was given a couple $100, the keys to a truck, thousands of dollars in inventory, and an atlas. And I set out from Oakland, California, San Francisco Bay Area, and drove to upstate New York. Not the Sterling Festival, but to Tuxedo, New York, outside of New York City, to do a Ren Fair. So there was no GPS. There was just literally me. And you know what? I'm going to show you something real quick. I actually bought one of these recently for nostalgia's sake, because I was trying to describe what it was like to drive with your atlas on your lap. And so you're like literally positioning it on your steering wheel, and maybe the headlights are going, or maybe you've got a flashlight happening so you can actually see what's happening at night as you're driving down the road. And there was
amazing we survived.
It is amazing we survived. There was no blue dot. And actually, the blue dot is a comic little thing, because I had a conversation there was a point where I had gotten lost because I missed a turn because I was looking at an atlas and was trying to figure out where I was. And I said to my then music partner in Brawler Whacker, I said, John, mark my words, at some point we're going to have a map that has a little blue dot. And that little blue dot is going to tell us exactly where we are on the map. And that is the thing that's going to happen. So I if only I'd have patented the little blue dot.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, right? Anyway, yes. The act of driving cross country in the before days when dinosaurs roamed the earth was it was an adventure. It was so much of an adventure. And what was really joyful about it was to me, I loved it, the total lack of communication, the total lack of connection. I developed at that point that the idea, one of my favorite ways to travel to this day is without context. You are traveling without context. You are nobody's friend, you're nobody's partner, you're nobody's daughter or son, you're nobody's lover, you're nobody's anything. You are your own human, absent of context. And the freedom of that is magical. It's something I to this day, I love traveling in Europe alone without context. But back in the day, it was literally, you'd pull these 10, 12, 14-hour drive days going totally across country, like literally West Coast to East Coast. And if you wanted to talk to another human being, you were pulling off to the side of the road, driving around until you found a payphone and throwing quarters in, so it was a little bit more Wild West, as Jonathan said. What would you have to add to that, Jonathan?
No, it's interesting, that some of your observations really resonated with me. That sense of adventure, the sense of self-sufficiency, being on your own, and having to have the resourcefulness to cope with flat tires and running out of gas and breakdowns and getting lost and figuring out where you were, and not knowing how far ahead the next decent motel might be, or having to make the choice to pull over into a rest stop in the middle of Nebraska somewhere, or whatever it is, and then or looking for a payphone and finding them out of order, or not having quite enough money to make it. So all of those things, there was that. Yeah, I guess adventure is really what it comes down to. It's a sense of really being on your own and setting out and having a destination, but there's this big void in between here and there that you're going to discover and cope with and deal with your own knowledge and resources. And then there's a sense of accomplishment having done it. It's like, it was driving all the way across the country with only what you set out with, and maybe maybe or maybe not touching base with somebody along the way.
Right.
You could go the whole way and simply really never have a conversation with anybody who knows you.
And that was also before you could get books on tape, and of course I'm dating myself by even calling them books on tape. Because it was literally on tape. And I was in a big old van with no radio. I didn't even have a radio.
Oh, wow.
And so
that is oscillating. Yeah,
it was. But it was interesting. And I was talking with another musician friend who does this as well, or did this as well, is one of the things of having one of the consequences of having a cell phone on you at all times, and the constant ability to pull yourself out of your immediate thoughts, is like, I used to get on these long road trips and I would just sit and play the penny whistle. I would learn tunes. I'd read sheet music, that atlas balanced on the steering wheel. I would balance sheet music on the steering wheel on these long, through drives, and just sit and play whistle the entire time, and so the number of tunes that I picked up driving across country solo was tremendous, and so now I don't have to entertain myself. And so I don't entertain myself. I allow myself to be entertained. I think that sense of adventure, you're right. It was a much higher sense of adventure. I encourage all of my younger generation friends to try, which earns an eye roll from Victoria. I encourage my younger generation friends to try it. Try turning off your cell phone and putting it out of reach. Put it in the trunk, put it in the very back of your car. You can't reach it. You can't get it. See what it feels like. There's, after that first sense of resistance and internal, like, what am I doing? That anxiety that we get now when we don't have our connection device, there's this sense of like, oh, it's like you settle in to your own thoughts and to being okay with your own thoughts. And you ruminate and you daydream in ways that you don't daydream when you have instant, salve to your solitude, so it's a really delicious feeling. And I miss it sometimes because I'm not as disciplined as I would like to be. I would like to just like throw the thing in the back seat and not think about it again. But you'll do that. And then the next rest stop, you're like, oh, I wonder what I've received. What's happening on YouTube?
Right. And there's also the thing where you get taken out of the reverie, the whatever the thought is, if a message comes up, it is an interruption of that flow. Yep. Even if you're not actively seeking it, then the little bing happens, like, oh, somebody wants me.
Exactly. And I feel like it draws our attention span into these minute increments, whereas my attention span for deep thought, where I would just literally sit and contemplate a thing or a book or a thing, and that would happen for hours and hours and hours because it's all you have to think about on these long road trips. And so now I find myself, it's much easier to think in, what is it? How many Twitter characters are there? You're allowed, or whatever, little blurbs for Facebook. And I have to fight with myself. I've been an avid journaler my entire life. And that's something we can chat about at some point, because I've got some like old journals from the way back. They're just like, gee. But that even in my own journaling, I find myself writing in smaller conceptual intervals, which I find is a way that I am fascinated and distressed with at how our modern means of communication is, directing my own writing process or my own thought process, so that's a very interesting modern phenomenon. Okay, so for me, I did actually get off the road at one point. It was in I want to say 2004, 2005, 2006. I decided that I wanted to get a degree. And I decided that I wanted that degree to be in comparative religions. So I got off the road in Florida, which had been my home base since about 1995 or so. Rented an apartment and started going to USF. Now, or was it University of South? Yeah, USF. Because the other one I went to was the San Francisco State, SFSU. I ended up in the Tampa Bay area pursuing an undergraduate degree in comparative religions, because how else do you make yourself less employable in continental America? Let's go for a philosophy minor. Oh, yeah. That was an adventure unto itself, because I had decided that I was just going to get off the road, right? But, it's Florida. So I've got options, so I was still doing the Florida Renaissance Festival in Fort Lauderdale. I was still doing a couple of the scattered little shows. And then, but Kansas City was, one of my big heavy hitting shows of the year. And, I could probably afford to, look, I found tickets, round trip, super cheap. I don't even think I was paying $100 round trip to Southwest flight from Tampa to Kansas City. So I thought, well, I'll just go to school full time and, just do this show. It turned out that I maintained my entire circuit whilst simultaneously going to school full time in Florida. And so I got off the road, but I didn't actually get off the road. And it was kind of dumb because I couldn't keep focused on anything. Everything was what shall I do tomorrow? My schedule was so finely tuned, which for those of you who actually know me, that's not a thing I do. And it was a little bit of a mishap. And then through various circumstances, I did not actually, I'm one paper short of my undergraduate degree. I know. This is ridiculous. So if anybody out there wants to let me hire them to write my final paper. No, I'm joking. I'm totally joking. Totally joking. But yeah, so that was my brief entertaining notion of getting off the road. Interestingly enough, I love, I literally since 1990, I've been doing this. I love my life. I love my job, my jobs. I love all the things that I do. While I went through maybe a couple years in the middle there, I lived in my van for 13 years. It was like hashtag van life before hashtag van life was a hashtag thing, and I went through a couple of years where people would say, "Oh, what do you do?" And I would be like, "Oh, well, I'm a musician." And be like, "Oh, where do you play?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I play a lot at such festivals." And I had this little moment where I was like, "Oh my God, I'm a adult ass touring person doing Ren fairs." And it was a little mortifying for no reason, because there's such it's an excellent venue. It's great money. It's everything about Ren Faire is actually really cool. And and for some reason in my own brain, I went through this period of time where I was just sort of, oh God, I can't believe I'm still doing this. And fortunately, that was very brief, because then I came back into realizing that I actually have the coolest job ever, and that people pay me to travel around the country, be creative, and and make music and make art and make jewelry, and it's a blessed life. I love it. All these years later, I still am in love with it. Yay. Anyway, Jonathan, you?
Yeah, I went through this arc. I never intended to be an actor. I kind of flirted with the idea when I was in college. I liked acting, I liked performing, but I was far too much of a realist to think that would ever possibly be a career path that that would be available, for a couple of reasons. I never really was a big city person. I never wanted to go to New York or LA and beat the pavement and do that whole thing. And also I saw the people that I knew going off on that path, basically becoming something other than what they intended to be. They either became waiters or carpenters or whatever, and not actually, arriving at their chosen career. So happening into this Renaissance Festival is just a summer lark, really, was an amazing bit of serendipity. Found a milieu that supported this kind of creativity that I hadn't even really experienced before: improvisation and interactive comedy and performance. This career kind of unfolded before me, and suddenly I was off to Pennsylvania, and then I was off to Texas, and had this circuit going, and more opportunities came up, and of course downtime, when I needed to continue to make money, and other fairs were out there. And I did a few other things. I worked food service at fairs, some, and I had a brief side career as a stilt dancer for a while. But through the 80s, I was working on building up, doing more and more affairs, and spending less and less time back at home in Vermont, picking up whatever odd jobs I could. After about 7 years of that, it kind of went the other way. I spent the entire year of 1989 on the road, and that felt like a bit much. And I didn't have enough really well-established gigs at that point. I was finding what I could here and there, and that got wearing and tiring. So I thought, well, maybe I should pull back and just hold on to the couple of fairs that are really working for me, and not try to be full time. And about the same time, I met the woman who was to become my wife, who happened to be Norwegian. So over the course of the early 90s, my career evolved from trying to do more and more Ren fairs to picking and choosing, and having a home base in Vermont at first, and going out. So I would go out to Scarborough and perform there. I'd go down to Florida and perform at the fair in Fort Lauderdale. And then we decided to move to Norway. So it really changed the way I approached doing fairs, because flying from Norway to commute to a fair is very different than hopping in your car and driving halfway across the country. But we weren't settled. Norway was an experiment for us. We had met in the States, we had lived together in the States, we got married in the States, and we weren't sure if Norway was really going to work for both of us. So I held on to two gigs. I held on to the Ohio Renaissance Festival gig. It just started the Arizona Fair. So we decided that we'd move to Norway, but I would commute and do Arizona, and then come back to Norway, and then do Ohio, and then come back to Norway. It was that was a hard period. For one thing, it's trying to have a family. Eventually we had a son together. Tanya had a baby when we met. So we had this small family, and being a parent was a challenging dimension to life to be going back and forth. But we held on. Norway became permanent by default, kind of. We never decided to extend our stay there indefinitely, but it indefinitely continued. And eventually, part of what did pull our marriage apart was all of that time apart and the stress of trying to maintain these two lives, of being at fairs part of the time and being in Norway part of the time. Interestingly, that sort of has continued to a degree. I eventually moved back from Norway, and now live in Vermont, but I still only really do two festivals. I do Arizona and Ohio. And rather than being on the road, I have two spokes that I go out and perform and then come back. And that works. I love those two environments. I love the communities. I love the job. I love the performing. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. But yeah, the sort of style of participation in festivals for me changed in the early 90s, from trying to do it all the time to picking and choosing a little bit more and holding on to those solid gigs, which has been great because I've performed now in Ohio 31 seasons and Arizona 25. So there's a deep continuity there, both in terms of the community and the people I surround myself with, and as well as the performances themselves, which have now, in Ohio, we have like third generation fans. It's a little shocking when somebody says, "I remember seeing you when I was my grandson's age." But at the same time, it's amazing to be that character culturally. How many people can take their grandkids to see something that they enjoyed as a kid, and it's still the same thing that they laughed at, the same guy putting mud in his armpit.
Wow, that's amazing. That sort of continuity, that's astonishing, Jonathan. How cool.
Yeah, and that is one of the things I absolutely credit Renaissance festivals, their longevity, their continuity, this episodic nature that they have, where they're always, people come back on an annual basis, and the fact that you have to come during that season to go to the fair. I know there's an interesting ritual aspect to that I think people may not consciously identify. Maybe some people do, but people, it's like, whenever I show up back in Yellow Springs, Ohio, which is where I live when I do the Ohio Renaissance Festival, I feel like I'm one of the swallows of Capistrano. People say, "Oh, is it that time of year again?" I've thought about having a T-shirt made saying, "Yes, it's that time of year."
That's awesome. You should totally do that. That's great, Jonathan.
So once festivals have been established for a number of years, there's a culture that's established at each festival of the expectations of the audience, and they carry that in, and that begins to sort of carry forth that sense of what the day is going to be like, and it carries the rest of the crowd with them. You get this sense of
Anticipation.
Yeah, well, and there's a happening that has a form, and we human beings are all about joining in when there are sets of expectations. Even if we don't know exactly what they are, we're very sensitive to looking around. It's like, oh, this is what's going on here. How do I fit in? How do I join? Especially when it's when a spirit of fun and celebration, which is always there at the core of any festival, any Renaissance festival.
Right. When people can step into their sense of wonder.
Yes.
That's that moment. I loved what you were saying, that it would be like a wave that swept across, because the minute you said it, it was like it viscerally took me into that sensation, and it was just like, oh yeah, that thing. And it's like a physical presence, it's like the spirit of wonder moves over the crowd, and suddenly there's alignment. Everybody is aligned to the common goal, which is, joyful participation and hilarity, and, whatever the moment is. But it's like it's like watching the wonder at Sterling, especially in the old days with Baj as Queen, watching the patrons come in at the beginning of the day. And, and it was all very much like, oh, and we are watching actors and they are, pretending to be the king and queen. And by the end of the day, they're just hanging on her word because she was the queen, and so watching the progression of commitment, in the patron, that they were just committed to being in that space with us. Mm-hmm. And then by the end of the day, we're just hanging off of Baj's every word, right, right. Because she was the queen, and it was just, it was delicious stuff. That.
Yeah. Yeah. People get into similar spirits at concerts, where everybody's, following in the same vibe, in the same space. A song has a meaning, has resonance. That carry people into a moment. Sporting events do it to a certain extent too, where everybody's focused on the same event, the same experience, and that brings people into alignment. But I guess I'm really attracted to what Renaissance festivals bring, because it's more complex than that. When you're at a concert, you're paying attention to the band on stage. When you're at a sporting event, you're paying attention to the players on the field. But and there are certainly, there are music sets and plays within Renaissance festivals, but overall, there's this really complex and generally unrestricted sense of play that pervades the whole place. Yeah, it just creates a much richer environment, to my mind, to my sensibilities, I guess.
Well, I think that's it comes straight from the immersion.
Yeah.
It's that 3D immersion. You are not watching a thing. You are in the center of that thing. It's like, I don't know why it popped to mind, but watching Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Mm-hmm. And the idea that you're coming in and you're seeing the back sides of all these things, or you're seeing the third dimension of all of these common scenes that we're familiar with, but the things that normally happen off stage, and so mm-hmm. when patrons are at a festival in the round, and how many times have you heard a performer make the statement, or imply, maybe not make the statement, but imply, you can talk to us. There's no division. We're not separate. You are me, mm-hmm. I am you. We're here in this moment together. And coax the person who is used to being an observer into being a participant, in those moments. And I think that's a lot of where that magic stems from, in my experience,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of the process, is once they've accepted that they are immersed and present wholeheartedly in that moment.
Right. Somebody, I don't remember who it was, that first observed this to me, about the nature of entertainment at Renaissance festivals, that, we're used to thinking of entertainment as something that happens to us. The festival environment is much more like entertainment as in entertaining guests. When you're entertaining guests, you're not presenting a thing for your guests to witness. You're inviting them in to participate in a comfortable, warm, happy environment. And that as when you're in that sense of entertaining, that's your goal. And that is much more aligned with what we do as entertainers at Renaissance festivals too. It's not just, here, let me show you this cool thing I can do, but let's all participate in a happening that I may be orchestrating or conducting or in some way bringing, but I'm not showing, I'm inviting you to be a part of that. And that's, I think that's a big part of the richness of the festivals.
Neat. That's an excellent observation. It reminds me of something that Doug Konjolka would say, actually. Like you said, I can't remember it. I was like, that sounds so Konjolka-y. Thank you so much for listening. This has been Ren Faire History, presented by Digital Ren Faire. My name is Misti Bernard. You can find me online at bluemuseproject.com and also my jewelry business at csongdesigns.com. Joining me has been the inimitable Jonathan Crocker.
Yes, thank you for listening. I'm Jonathan Crocker. You can find me at wildman.com, representing the Wild Men, the Arizona Renaissance Festival, or moremud.com, which represents Theater in the Ground, performing mud shows at the Ohio Renaissance Festival. You can also find us on Facebook as Theater in the Ground and the Wild Men.